Hotep Nefer Kemet. Welcome in great peace to Egypt. I am General Wendjebau-en-djed. You can simply call me Wendjebau. I served as a general, high dignitary, and high priest under the rule of Psusennes I of the 21st dynasty around 1047 to 1001 BC. Even though I wasn't a royal personage, the fact that I held such significant positions permitted me to get the high honor of being buried in the royal necropolis. I have crossed the time barrier to talk to you about the army in ancient Egypt. This will include the army divisions, the defensive and offensive arms, the military costumes, the tactics and strategies during the war, and the enemies of ancient Egypt.
Once again, I have crossed the time barrier to talk to you today about offensive arms used by the army of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians employed projectile weapons to debilitate their adversaries before an infantry assault. Historically, the main projectile weapon was the bow and arrow. Javelins, spears, throw sticks, and slings were also employed. Later, the catapults were employed. But for most of Egypt's history, the bow and arrow served as the main projectile weapon. Since the predynastic era, people have used bows and arrows. The earliest bows were frequently horn bows, constructed by fastening two antelope horns to the center of a piece of wood. Bows were constructed of wood at the beginning of the dynastic period. They were strung with either animal tendons or strings made of plant fiber, and they had a single curve. Bows frequently had two curves in the predynastic period, but throughout the Old Kingdom, a single arched bow known as a simple bow was used instead. These were used to shoot three-feathered, flint, or hardwood or later, bronze-tipped reed arrows. Each arrow had a wooden foreshift fastened to the distal end of a reed main shaft. The arrows were between 80 and 85 centimeters in length. The bow itself was fashioned of a wooden rod that narrowed at either end and was typically around 1 meter long. Either the string was fastened to a protruding piece of horn, or it was placed into a hole or groove in the wood at either end. The Egyptian bow was made of a spherical piece of wood that was approximately 1.5 meters long, virtually straight, and tapered at both ends to a point. Or, if not strung, curved inward in the center. Additionally, in some cases, it had a piece of wood or leather attached to it or inserted above and below the center. The Egyptians placed the bottom tip of the bow in the ground before bending it with one hand and passing the string with the other into the notch at the upper extremity while standing or sitting with the knee pressed against the inside of the bow. And there was one case of a man supporting the bow in that posture by resting it on his shoulder. They typically wore protection on their left arm when shooting to protect it from being injured by the string. A thong that was wrapped above the elbow was used to fasten this around the wrist and keep it there. On occasion, a metal groove was fitted to the foreknuckle in which the arrow ran after being discharged. The chasseur would occasionally hold extra arrows in his right hand as he pulled the string, and his bow appears to have been less powerful than those used in battle. Either the forefinger and thumb or the two forefingers were used in their drawing technique. And though in the chase they often brought the arrow merely to the breast, their custom in war was to carry it to the ear, the shaft of the arrow passing very nearly in a line with the eye. Catgut typically served as the bowstring in Egypt. Sometimes, the car-based archer would utilize them to ensnare his adversary while striking him with a sword. The composite bow first saw use during the New Kingdom. With a bow that was as tiny and light as possible, the composite bow attained the greatest range conceivable. The arm of the archer was the longest draw length possible, In order to prevent the wood from breaking, a horn was added to the belly of the bow. The majority of the archers utilized the simpler bows, whereas the composite bows were used first by the charioteers since they needed to be able to pierce scale armor. Each bowman was provided with a sizable quiver that held a large number of arrows. A belt that crossed the breast to the other side, across the shoulder, supported it. In Egypt, it was customary to draw the arrows from beneath the archer's arm and place the quiver almost horizontally. The quiver was only positioned behind the back and protruded above the top of the shoulder during the march or other times when the arrows were not needed. This is part of a quiver. The battle chariot had a bow case attached to it. Another sizable case with 2 spears and extra arrows was across it, sloping in the opposite way. The fighter typically carried 3 extra quivers hooked to his chariot in addition to the one he wore. A more compact bow sheath was provided to army archers. The central portion of the bow is protected by a leather sheath. For close quarters fighting, the charioteers' offensive tools included a falchion, dagger, curved stick, mace, or battle axe. The helmet or quilted headgear and a coat made of the same materials served as their defense mechanisms. However, they lacked a shield that could obstruct the bow's unfettered use. The spear is suitable for both close combat class and projectile weapons. It consisted of a pointed blade made of copper or flint attached to a long wooden shaft. The javelin, lighter and shorter than the spear, was also of wood, and similarly armed with a strong 2-edged metal head. Conventional spears were made for throwing or thrusting. Because of its greater weight, the spear was better at penetration than the arrow. But this was not effective against armored shields. During the New Kingdom, it was often an auxiliary weapon of the charioteers, who were thus not left unarmed after spending all their arrows. It was also most useful in their hands when they chased down fleeing enemies, stabbing them in their backs. The spear was appreciated enough to be depicted in the hands of Ramesses III killing a Libyan. It remained short and javelin-like, just about the height of a man. The Egyptian sword was straight and short, measuring between 70 and 90 centimeters, typically double-edged, and tapered to a point. Its major objective was to cut and thrust. The dagger was smaller than the sword. Its bronze blade was tapering gradually towards the point. Its handle was hollowed in the middle, and gradually increasing in thickness at either end. Its total length measured about 30 centimeters. This is a collection of daggers from the New Kingdom period. Usually, the dagger is placed in the waist girdle, sloping to the left. The falchion was like a scimitar. It was more generally used than the sword and was carried by light as well as heavy-armed troops. It was a most efficient weapon regarding its weight, size, and form of the blade. The back of this bronze or iron blade was sometimes cased with brass. The king here smites the heads of the enemies with his falchion. Here, Ramesses III received the scimitar from god Horus as a symbol of victory. The axe, or hatchet, was small and simple, about 60 centimeters in length. It had a single blade. It was employed in close-range combat, destroying town gates, and cutting down trees for military construction. The bronze or iron blade was fixed to the shaft by either bronze pins or thongs of hide. The soldier, on his march, either held it in his hand or suspended it at his back with the blade downwards. The mace was very similar to the poleaxe, without a blade, and has a striking ball at one end. It was made of wood, wrapped in bronze, and measured about 75 centimeters. It was also equipped with an angular metal piece that protruded from the handle. It may have served as a guard. However, in many cases it appeared that the hand had been raised above it as the blow was being delivered. A second type of mace was similar to the first one but without the ball. A third variety had a consistent thickness along its whole length and was occasionally wider at the top. Both light and heavy forces employed this bent stick or club during close battle. These are different shapes of maces. This shows King Narmer, Mina, the founder of the first dynasty, smiting his enemy with his mace. And here, Ramesses III is smashing his enemies' heads with his mace. One of the Egyptians' projectile weapons was the sling, which they used to hurl stones. The sling was not as common in battle as the bow and arrow. The sling was either a plaited rope or a leather thong. It featured a loop at one end through which it could be secured and firmly grasped. It was broad in the middle. The other extremity terminating in a slash escaped from the finger as the stone was thrown. To stabilize it and give it more momentum when it was in use, the slinger spun the weapon 2 or 3 times over his head. It was used by skirmishers with light weapons to divert the enemy's attention. The ease of finding ammunition in numerous areas was one of its key benefits. Sling bullets were manufactured throughout the late period when lead became more commonly available. These were chosen over pebbles due to their heavier weight and increased effectiveness. They frequently had a mark. The previously explained defensive and offensive arms were used by all kinds of troops, infantry, chariotry, and navy. The following episode will deal with these troops. So long.
Make sure to tune into my next videos. If you have any thoughts or questions, add them to your comments. Kindly press the like, share and subscribe buttons. I'm Farag al-Sharabasi, and see you in the next episodes. Thank you.